Thomas merchandise, an endless rabbit hole of a topic. Some incredibly popular and even culturally significant toys have been released in the decades since the show first went on air, and that's not even mentioning the merch from the Railway series. But that's not what we're talking about today. No, instead I wanted to hone in on some of the least successful ranges Thomas has ever put out. From hits questionable licensing choices to a range that's not even on the wiki, there's a number of merch lines nobody ever seems to talk about. 5, in fact, and I'm going to count them down based on how little success they had. Before we start, I also would like to mention that I won't be going over lines such as Thomas Wood or Adventures. We'll be using this as a chance to delve into more obscure territory. So, without further ado, I'm Jaden, aka the Win Wilbur, and today we're going to be counting down the top 5 least successful Thomas merchandise ranges. Alright, right off the bat, here's one that I bet none of you have ever heard of before. DanJam Toys, a UK-based company, produced wooden toys for Thomas roughly around 2007 to 2009, alongside other properties such as Bob the Builder and Peppa Pig. In addition to a couple of cursed build-it-yourself and collect-style toys, they released a brand called Big Buddy, which featured only 4 characters: Thomas, Percy, Birdie, and Harold, all of which look as if Thomas Wood and Goldenbear had a deranged baby. They had stated that more engines would be released in the range in the future, but that never came to be. Only a couple of years later, in 2012, the company went out of business, citing the economic recession of the time as being the primary reason. From what I've seen from scouting sites like UK eBay, there's hardly anything from DanJam's Thomas range, especially when it comes to the Big Buddy line. This shows that these toys were pretty unpopular, but then again, I don't live in the UK, so I don't know if these could be easily found in places like charity shops. Ultimately, DanJam Toys makes this list because not only did their toys sell poorly, they likely contributed to the company going out of business entirely. Next up is one that I find pretty interesting. Collect Thomas is a range that was produced by Sony from 2001 to 2002 that doesn't even have a wiki page. Hey y'all, Editing Jaden here. If you check the wiki right now, there's a page of this line that was added a couple of days after I finished the script by a friend of mine, Tidmouth Yard Studios. So let's pretend that's not there, alright? Alright. Anyways, this line was only sold in Japan, and it featured tiny renditions of Thomas characters on little plates with sort of locations, almost akin to dioramas. These little plates could connect to each other like puzzle pieces, allowing children to create their own dynamic worlds for their trains to travel on. The engines themselves were incredibly detailed for their size, and had adjustable couplings, painted lining and numbers, and even accurate wheel arrangements. The molds were so good in fact that some of them were later used for Pez dispensers. There were 2 waves, which released engines 1 through 8, minus Gordon, as well as Bill and Ben, and some rolling stock in the form of Annie, Clarabelle, and a troublesome truck. All in all, this range seems awesome, and it's pretty sad it got discontinued so quickly. My best guess as to why it vanished so fast is that maybe Capsule Playrail, which released around the same time, stole some of its thunder? Or hey, maybe it just didn't sell. Either way, it's making this list because of how mysterious it is. There really seems to be next to nothing about it online. Time to see what's in the number 3 spot. Interactive Learning Railway. What a throwback this is. If you've seen my video about Interactive Learning Railway, I'm sure you can understand why it's here. Lasting only 1 year between 2004 and 2005, this line by Learning Curve is somewhat famous for just how weird it is. It blends Thomas Wooden Railway and Take-Along into this fascinating love child of die-cast metal and TWR proportion bodies, and it was discontinued absurdly fast. They only managed to release 6 engines, those being 1 through 7, except Edward, and a number of destinations, which had a whole sound feature thing where if you ran the engines over a specific area, it would emit some sort of sound like a whistle or an order from the Fat Controller. Overall, this line likely just suffered from poor sales, as it was very similar to Take-Along and Thomas Wooden Railway, and hardly anybody seemed to know it existed. If you're curious to learn more, check out my video on it. Link is in the description. Anyway, shameless plug aside, let's move on. Okay, the second biggest failure on this list is Mash'ems. Oh, I love these stupid little guys. Mashrooms is a range of mystery-bagged, squishy, rubbery gel toys produced by Tech4Kids. They were pretty popular as it was the era of blind bag or mystery toys, and were constantly on store shelves. Alongside a number of other properties like Paw Patrol and My Little Pony, they did a Thomas & Friends line from 2016 to 2016. That's right, this line lasted for less than a year. In that brief time, they produced 6 characters: Thomas, Gordon, James, Percy, Toby, and the Topham Hatt, who looks interesting.
Look at this dude.
Really, all of these characters look bewildering. They had some of the craziest proportions I've seen on any Thomas toy, of course because of the squishy nature, and overall are some of the best things I've ever seen. After releasing the normal-ish first batch of characters, they made a second series, which was the exact same but with crystal versions of the characters. These beautiful cursed things were cancelled pretty much instantly, just because, especially with minis being an obvious mystery toy competitor, nobody wanted them. In addition, they popped really easily and cursed store shelves and Thomas events for many years. Also, these guys have managed to become collector's pieces on eBay? Why? Despite all that, Mashrooms is my favorite Mattel-approved Thomas range ever. Don't at me. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at what I think is the biggest Thomas merchandise failure ever. So, ever heard of Character Builder? Yeah, neither have I. These foam toys were made by MV Sports and Leisure in 2005, and much like Mashrooms, lasted for less than a year. This line is such a deep cut that in the description of the one listing I can find from them on eBay, which is a complete collection by the way, the seller discusses how they allegedly spoke to a Thomas fandom site member of 12 years who had never even heard of its existence. Now, if you take a quick glance at any engine in this line, something seems wrong. These guys look so wonky and cursed, it's kind of incredible. They also seem to bear a large resemblance to the Erdl toy line, which I guess served as the bases when they were designed. As far as I can tell, there were 6 engines released for this line: Thomas, Edward, James, Percy, Toby, and Mavis, a pretty random selection of characters by the way. And there were a total of 4 sets: the engine set, the Tidmouth Station set, the Journey set, and the impressively large engine shed set, which featured a grand total of 70 pieces. For being such a completely unknown and short-lived range, I have to admit, these are pretty cool. I could also imagine that kids would have a fun time assembling the engines themselves and running them around the track, although that does sound a bit like Lego to me. Now, it's worth noting that nobody really knows when these were discontinued, and I'm just assuming they didn't last longer than 2005. Really, that just goes to show how hidden of a line this is, if we can't even get a date for when they stopped producing it. My best guess for why it stopped existing so soon is directly tied to how forgotten it is. It didn't sell. As it seems, nobody wanted these strangely proportioned foam engines. And that is why they're sitting comfortably at number 1 on my list of the top 5 least successful Thomas toy ranges. And that's it. That's the video. This was really fun to put together, and I honestly love looking at the histories of Thomas merchandise ranges. What do you think of my list? Do you agree, or is there a placement you think could have been better suited for something else? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like, maybe even subscribing. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!